Ready to roll?
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Board of Selectmen's meeting for July 9th, 2019. Please stand and salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we have a busy agenda for tonight. At 6:30, we're in executive session. And in reviewing the agenda here, we have invited guests. Rep. David Meridian will be here. Also, we have a public hearing for a common vicular license. Number 6.1 on our agenda is RFP committee appointments. Number 6.2 is discuss the closure of Warren Street. 6.3 is motion to approve year-end budget transfers. Then we have also a motion to approve the Bonner Natural Area Conservation Restriction. We also will be executing some contracts for the DPW. Motion to approve Open Space Committee letter of support. We also have the article regarding the Board of Assessors supplemental billing, town manager's report, new business, and some look-ahead topics. So we will start with Article 4.0, which is reviewing the meeting minutes from June 18th, I should say. So, any discussion?
Not
Okay.
other than the one you pointed out?
All right. I did note that there was a spelling error. My name actually was omitted on line 44. So I will make a motion that we approve the meeting minutes from June 18th, subject to the correction on line 44.
Second.
Unanimous?
Unanimous.
All right. All right. Let's see. Is Rep. Meridian here? I don't think David is here yet.
Spoke to him earlier today. He was in Boston, so he could be stuck in traffic for all we know.
Okay. All right. So then we will skip over. It's too early for the Vic hearing. So we're going to move on. We're going to discuss the RFP committee appointments. We do have two members that have already been put forward for the EDC. Their rep would be David Ross. And from the Historic Commission, it would be Catherine Worsham. So I would suggest that maybe we make a motion and appoint those two members, and then we can get into discussion and deliberation, and we'll invite other folks in attendance here who have put forward an application.
I'll move to appoint Dave Ross and Catherine Wolsham to the EDC, the RFP committee, I'm sorry.
Second?
Unanimous action. Okay. Now we have, I believe it's 6 other applicants. So I'll call out the names. If people could maybe just put their hand in the air and let us know if you're here in attendance. Maureen Byrne. She is not. All right. Antonio Casanta.
He's on vacation. He responded he was on vacation.
He's on vacation. Okay. Jessica Curran. Hi, Jessica. Stephen Johnson. Doesn't look like Stephen's here either. Kelly Pollard. Hi there. And let's see, we have Craig Weinfuss. I see Craig. And Catherine we've already put in. All right. So would you please come up, introduce yourself to the board, and tell us a little bit about yourself and why you'd like to serve.
walk right up here.
Oh, you can sit at the table.
Jessica Curran, I participated in the working group for the Economic Development Committee, so I just had an interest in seeing the project come to fruition. I saw the email go out looking for additional volunteers, some empty slots, so I wanted to do my part to contribute if you needed the help. We're somewhat new to town. We moved here 3 years ago. I'm gonna be here a while. It's probably, I don't say this in a negative way, nobody take this offensively, it's probably the least amount of amenities and conveniences I've ever had in my life. So I'd like to bring some to town that, we travel a lot out of town to do stuff with our kids, looking for childcare, going out to restaurants, doing stuff. So the more we could bring into town, I would enjoy that. So for personal reasons, I'd like to see this project come to fruition and be something we all are proud of and appreciate.
Very good. Does anybody have any questions?
No, I'm all set, thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Mhm. And Kelly, if you would please come up and introduce yourself and
Hi, my name is Kelly Pollard. I have lived in Upton for the last about 2.5 years, and I was a resident in Mendon for my whole entire life up until this point. I went to the Mendon Upton School District, graduated in Nipmuc. I have a background in RFP development, RFP response, interview preparation for construction management, architecture, design. So this is something that I definitely am knowledgeable about, passionate about, and you would think maybe I don't get enough of that at my day job at Considerly Construction, but I actually really enjoy it, so it's something I'm really excited to have the opportunity to be a part of here in town. And I've been a part of the working group as well since the first meeting in January. Loves being a part of it, loves seeing where things have gone, and I'm really excited about all the opportunities in the town and everything that could end up happening, and I think I can help kind of move things along.
very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
questions?
Awesome.
Yeah, very good. And Mr. Weinfuss?
I'm Craig Weinfuss, I live at Hazeltine Road, Upton, Mass. I'm a lifelong member of the community, and I'd like to apply for the RFP position because I understand how important it is to rebuild our Upton Center, make it a child-friendly and pedestrian-friendly area, and also stimulate the economic development of our small business growth here in town. I think if we had a critical mass of buildings in the downtown, we could really make it an incubator for small business growth, possibly have buildings that have retail on the bottom and affordable housing on the top floors. Several key factors to making sure this is a successful RFP process. The RFP should be as clear as possible. Luckily, we have the 100-page Dodson report that we can use as a launching point for composing the RFP. Several qualities which our town values have been outlined on page 6 of the Dodson report, which are mixed use, improved streets, shared parking, diverse housing, and updated zoning. Many of these values have been taken from previous studies, such as the 2005 Master Plan, the 2007 Upton Open Space Project, the 2011 Upton Open Space and Recreation Plan, the 2012 Production Plan, Housing Production Plan, and the 2018 EDC Core Principles for a Revitalized Upton Center Plan, and also the Complete Streets Plan. The challenge for the RFP committee they'll be facing is taking these principles and turning them into a reality in the downtown area. My background as a technical writer can help shape this document. I have a professional writing and technical communications certificate from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and also 20 years of experience in the field working at software companies and science companies composing technical documentation. So I believe this experience will translate well into constructing a very detailed, concise, and easy to interpret RFP with a clear intent. Technical writing is not just paying attention to the grammar and spelling, it's making sure that the concepts are expressed in a clear and easy to understand way. If our communication is too vague, a developer will not respond well to our RFP. We need to avoid open-ended conceptual ideas and have a concrete, detailed plan that can be manifested in reality. We also need to make sure that our thoughts are presented in an organized fashion. We do not ask redundant questions, and the RFP does not have contradictory requirements, because these things will be frustrating for the developer if they're reading them and they find contradictory terms and statements. In addition to this, figuring out the details is very important. We'll need to figure out the details of the project, such as the timeline, exactly what needs to get done and when, and this will help bidders accurately calculate their budgets and allocate internal resources. In addition to being a technical writer, I've been promoted to a project manager and team management roles in the past 2 companies that I've worked for. In these roles, I am responsible for creating timelines, keeping projects on track, and ensuring employee success. These forward-thinking skills will apply to creating a timeline for our revitalization efforts for the downtown area, and will help us to meet the promised timelines for the developers and the citizens of Upton. In addition to this, determining the audience is important. Although determining the audience may sound self-evident, it may not be as clear-cut as we initially imagined. Saying we want to create an RFP for a developer is a bit too simplistic. We need to narrow our focus to a developer who has a consistent track record for producing good results for communities that are similar to our own. We also want to make sure that the scope of our project is not too big or too small for the given developer. Also, given that we will be working within the historical district of Upton, we will need to select a developer who has worked with historical buildings in the past. Interviewing developers to make sure we find a good fit will be critical to our revitalization success. This past June, a couple weeks ago, I attended a historical building reuse conference out in Great Barrington, Mass, which was hosted by the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission. And during this conference, we discussed our revitalization efforts here in Upton with a couple developers who attended the conference. And I have these contacts, so I think they'll be important during this process, talking to historical-minded developers as we go along, and talking about the success that they've had in recreating their downtowns and their historical buildings. I also went up to Berlin, Mass. There's a church up there called 19 Carter. It's not a church anymore. It's a revitalized community center, and it's a very vibrant community center. And they have like a jam-packed schedule of people coming in and doing performing arts. This weekend, actually, they have some performing arts events that I'm going to attend. And I was talking to the president and CEO of it's a 501(c) nonprofit organization, and she was presenting the plan and all of the information that the master plan that she had gone through in order to preserve this historical church. So I think maybe we can probably use some of the processes that they went through in order to help facilitate our RFP committee. So that is a valuable resource to us as well. In addition to my technical writing background, I've been actively engaged in the Dodson Working Group since day one, and I've also been attending the EDC meetings for several years now, and also the Historical Commission meetings. I have also read the entire 100-page Dodson report and the other related town reports, such as the 2005 master plan and the open space plans. This will give me a good understanding of the tenets that we want to achieve and manifest as a reality in our downtown. I know it's going to be kind of tricky taking these kind of philosophical and conceptual ideas and making them into a reality in the downtown that we see every day. So I want to make sure that we incorporate these ideas into the downtown area, and I think it will be a little bit tricky putting these into the actual report and then manifesting them into a reality. It will have to be a very detailed report, I'm sure, and my technical writing background, I think, can help facilitate to make sure that these concepts are very clear and translated to the developers in a concise manner. So some of the important tenets, I think, are creating a critical mass of buildings in the downtown area to draw foot traffic and establish new businesses, creating a mixed-use development area, the improved streetscapes, including sidewalks, crosswalks, intersections, and the complete streets layout, which will make it a safe and family-friendly area for people to shop. And if it's safe, then I think it will be a real incubator for small businesses as well. and it will just create a very vibrant downtown area. So I want to make sure that that's a success and we manifest that into reality. In addition, I know the feasibility study has been talking about the community center, so that's something I would definitely want to make sure that we see and manifest into a reality, working with them. And I know the EDC has been talking about 40B housing. I know we have to get our criteria up to 1%, I think, for affordable housing in order to apply for mass grants and things like that. So I'd like to definitely incorporate that into the RFP committee. And also people have expressed an interest in retaining the New England look and feel of the downtown area. So given my professional background and active engagement with the town through the visioning process, my skill set will be an important contribution to the RFP committee and will help our downtown revitalization make it a success for our town, for the tax-paying citizens of our town, and also the developers that are selected for the revitalization process. So,
Okay, very good, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great.
I think it's 10%.
was that?
I think the goal is 10%
Oh, is it
affordable
10%?
housing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but that's all right. Very good. Okay, so we have a total of 4 appointments plus 1 at-large member. So we have a total of 5 appointments. We have 3 excellent applicants who have stepped forward. Any discussion?
So a couple of, just want to, before we start talking about, I just want to confirm again the counts of people. So Dave Ross is the EDC rep. Catherine is Historic Commission, right?
That's correct.
Yep.
And then the planning board passed, so that's an appointment by the board that we'll make.
Yes, we'll have that appointment.
Yeah. And then we also have Maureen, who's the representative from the board, as one of the 7 members, right?
You haven't changed your mind?
Yeah. Okay. And so are there other slots that we have, or is it just because there's 3 that we've got covered, so there's 5 more that need to be appointed?
So we have the 2 at-large members,
Okay, so that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
the 1 working group, which I think you may have there.
Yeah.
And of course, you've already
And the
mentioned the
appointment for
planning
the
board.
planning board, right?
Yes. Well, but didn't, or, okay, so Dave is the EDC, not necessarily the working group.
Right.
Got it.
Right.
Okay. Got it. So we've got 5 appointments to make out of all the applications we've gotten so far.
Right.
Okay, thank you for just walking me through that. I don't have any questions about appointing the 3 folks that were here tonight
I don't know.
at all.
But I think we have 3 excellent candidates here, so
Yes.
I would take a motion to appoint those 3. I guess we could appoint one as, say, technically that planning board slot, or we could actually make one of them the working group appointment, and 2 as at-large members.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it matters, does it?
I don't think it does at
Well,
all.
probably not now, no.
Not right at this point. So, okay. So I make a motion that we appoint Jessica Curran, Kelly Pollard, and Craig Weinfuss to the EDC RFP committee.
I'll second that.
Make that unanimous action. Okay, now we have,
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Questions?
Of course.
I apologize if this was already published, but do you have a timeline for when this looks like it might kick off? A timeline you want to get it completed in? How frequent will the meetings be? That sort of thing? Just so we have a general understanding of what the expectation is as well.
I think that's going to be discussed with the RFP committee itself. That won't really be under our direction. So hopefully the committee can start meeting, I'm going to say in the next 2 weeks. It's summer schedule, so obviously, that's why we will have, at least one at-large alternate member, which will always help to have a quorum. But we would like to have, you folks meeting, within the next 2 weeks. And then I would assume, I shouldn't say, I really don't know how long it will take before your work is completed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, if I may just add, I know that the EDC partly has a vested interest in working with the RFP committee too. So Dave Ross is from the EDC, and so he's going to be there as well. So it's a question of that group, to Steve's point, sitting down and sort of mapping out what the next several weeks look like, and ultimately getting toward that finalized RFP, because the whole process is going to take time to develop it, to write it, to get feedback on it, to socialize it, and then to obviously get the responses back. So, but yeah.
Right. Yes?
Chair, Michelle Lynch, around 148 South Street. I think the last meeting you guys did not take action on the mission statement and goals for the RFP meetings. Will you be doing that before they meet or after they meet, just to sort of give them a sense of what the expectation is?
I think until we know for sure, I think we also have, I can't remember now if it was through CMRPC, we had a grant proposal, I believe, with
No,
some
mass development.
mass development.
Mhm.
So I don't know if we need to specifically make that, at some point in time, I'm sure we will, but I don't think we need to do that before the first meeting. I think enough work has been done. We are planning on having the EDC in before us to try to kind of narrow up some of the ideas. We've got a lot of ideas that are flying around out there, and this is something that, as a board, we kind of want to take control of this and make sure that we kind of just draw the scope in, get the focus a little bit tighter, so that ultimately, the goal when we're talking about this RFP, the goal is, to market properties that we currently have the ability to market, which is basically the 2 Thompson properties, I think it's more than 2, and the town's owned 2 properties, which we received permission, of course, at the last annual meeting. So I think that's something important that we're going to be looking to do in the very near future, which is try to, probably, if we're going to call a meeting with the EDC, we really should have the RFP committee in as well. So I think that would be a good idea. So we can do that almost as a workshop to try to kind of, again, just try to tighten up the focus a little bit, because I hear a lot of ideas. I'm sure my colleagues are hearing a lot of ideas, and we've got to be careful that we're not looking, to redo 5 square miles of town. Ultimately we've got to draw that focus in a little bit tighter. I know that's an over-exaggeration, but I think that's something that's on everybody's mind.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. We all need to work together to make sure everybody's on the same page, right? It doesn't make sense to have an RFP committee sort of going down one path and an EDC that's thinking something else and a board of selectmen that's thinking something else. So I think having a joint meeting is a really good idea. So I think that'll help, to your point, Michelle, sort of clarify what's the scope, what are we trying to do with this initial RFP, what kind of timeline are we expecting, do we think we can achieve, and have that conversation with all 3 groups present, and then with the public is interested. So.
Right. I think timeline, that's something that you really hit the nail on the head there, is timeline. How quickly do we want to have this done? How quickly do we want to have this, out marketed, in the public eye, so to say. So, yes. So, moving forward, we still have an at-large alternate member that we need to appoint. And I believe we have one other full member, full voting member. We currently would have 3 remaining candidates, so we do have an opportunity. We could actually make 2 at-large members, and that way we would not have to turn anybody away. But I'll open that up for discussion. I guess before we move forward, is that anything that either one of you thinks is a valuable idea?
So just to clarify, I'm assuming, as a reminder, the 2 at-large members are non-voting members, so it's a committee of 5 with 2
No.
associate members? Because I'm confused that those 2 people
They're
wouldn't
all
have
voting, they're all voting members.
Okay, sorry,
There's
then I
7
misunderstood
voting
what you said.
members,
Yeah.
1 at-large alternate. And again, the alternate can sit in and vote for
Right.
any member who's not, regardless, whether it was a historic commission or
Okay.
the EDC rep, it doesn't matter that.
So it's a
that,
7 voting member
yes.
committee.
And we currently have 3 other applicants.
three applicants then?
So we have the applicants
Maureen
remaining.
Byrne, Steve Johnson, and Antonio
Casanta, I think it is.
Cassandra?
Casasanta. Casasanta. Casasanta.
You could fill the committee.
And none of these folks are here, is that right?
No.
Right. Apparently, two of them are on vacation, or perhaps all three are on
I only
vacation.
heard back from one other person, which was Antonio.
Antonio Casanta.
I didn't get a response from the others.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, we can either wait until they can come to a meeting, or we can appoint them now, or...
How soon does the committee want to get together though?
Yeah.
When's the next meeting, August 23rd? 20th?
And they've had, I mean, this has been out there for how long for people to apply?
Early June?
Early June.
Yeah, I'm thinking we're coming up on 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
so, yeah. So I guess your question is, do we appoint all three? I mean, we should just appoint all three. The question is, who's the alternate? Would be the...
Right.
Well, don't have the ability to appoint all three unless we create another at-large alternate member. Then we could appoint all three. Two would be alternates, one would be a full voting member. Right, because we have one, we only have the ability to appoint two, we have three.
You have two at-large members.
We have two
but
at large.
voting
Oh, we have
members.
two open spots. We've appointed 5 people.
Right,
So there's 2 open slots and an alternate,
right.
right?
I don't think so.
Right
Two
now,
at-large
the-
are voting members.
Right now, you have one alternate position to be appointed and one full position to be appointed.
Right, that's what's left. Because don't forget Maureen, you have Maureen, David, Catherine,
Yeah.
that's 3.
Jessica, Kelly, and Craig.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's 6. So that leaves us with 1
Got it.
You
So
know,
then we
full
appoint
voting
2,
member.
okay.
and
I see.
1 at-large.
Yeah.
Okay.
Alternate. So the first thing we would need to do, I guess, is modify the committee and vote, make a motion to make an additional at-large alternate member. That'd be the first thing we need to do. And then the second thing we need to do is decide which one of the 3 remaining candidates needs to be, a full, say, a working group or an at-large,
I mean, do we need to
Member.
create a second alternate position? I mean, I think we just appoint 2 of the 3 people and, I mean,
If
doesn't
you
matter to
add
me.
another
We
one,
can
you have
create as
8,
many-
so you have-
I
yeah.
mean, we can do, it's whatever is your pleasure.
So you're trying to increase it by 1?
Well, that way we don't have to say no to somebody. The way it stands now, we would have to say no to somebody, so it's up to
Right.
you two if you would like to.
So I would advocate for Antonio to be the voting member. I just have he's been at several meetings. He was on the revitalization group as part of the working group. He's got an experience in finance and economics. His family's built houses for 40 years. And, he's somebody that's, new to town, so I think that's great. And I think he's got some great perspective. So I would advocate for having Antonio be the voting member.
Now, the other name that I'm
Okay,
sorry.
no, do you want to do them individually, or do you want to?
Well, I was gonna say, the only other name that I saw that is a name I recognize, he's a longtime Upton resident, was Stephen Johnson.
Okay,
So we could appoint Stephen as the alternate member, or we could appoint Stephen as the voting member and Antonio as the alternate. I guess that would be a point of discussion.
I would think Antonio for the voting member. And we need to appoint Stephen for the alternate.
Yep, I would support that. So I would make a motion that we appoint Antonio Casasanta as the at-large voting member for the RFP committee and Stephen Johnson as the alternate member of the RFP committee.
I'd second.
Make that unanimous action?
And then the question is, do we want to add a second alternate or not? We can do that separately, right? Do we want to, I don't feel strongly about it, I don't.
I would, I'm only thinking this
Maybe-
process may be a longer process than what people are thinking. And if the RFP doesn't get a favorable response its first time, you know, there's no real timeline here. So whereas there is no real timeline, I think it may be a good idea, especially, you know, we do have a lot of new committee members. And that's a good thing. That's what we're looking for, is new committee members. So we kind of hate to turn a new committee member away, especially if there's time constraints. So I would be in favor of Maureen Byrne, but again, if you think that,
I mean, it's not about the people for me, it's about the numbers, right? Like you're, even having a 7-person committee is a lot. You get 7 people sitting around a table, good luck getting anything done. So anything beyond that you add to the mix feels to me like it's a lot of talking and less work getting done. So I think it's already a big committee, but you know, I know Maureen's been on the Historic Commission. She's done a lot for the town in the past, you know, and she's one of those people that I hope would find something to do elsewhere on other committees. So, you know, but again, I don't feel strongly about it.
No, I would agree with you, but I think keep the number the way it is.
keep the number at
Yeah.
7 with
7
one alternate.
with one alternate, right?
Okay.
Okay, good.
Yep. Okay, so we've got that solution. And I believe at our last meeting, I believe we did appoint you as the Board of Selectmen appointment.
We didn't officially do that.
Oh, they
did
didn't
not.
officially do it.
Okay.
Well, I make a motion that the Board of Selectmen appoint Maureen Dwinell as our representative on the RFP Development Committee.
Okay, I'll second the motion. You're gonna,
Vote for myself?
Yeah, I don't know if that's a
You
thing.
can.
I don't know if that's a thing or not. I don't know. You need a Robert's Rules consult on that one. Do you vote for your own nomination? Yeah.
I think you can in theory.
I can in theory, yes.
Yeah.
All right. All right, well then we're done with the RFP committee appointments at this point. Let's go back to.
Nice work, everybody, and nice
Yeah.
work, board. That's a big committee to
Yes.
fill out, so.
It is,
It's
but I.
exciting to get a lot of new people involved and some new
It is,
perspective.
and I think we're gonna get a lot of good ideas,
Yep,
so.
yep.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for stepping forward.
See you later. Thank you.
Take care. Okay. In the agenda, I'm going to move back to 5.0, public hearing, the Common Vic public hearing. It is, we're running a little late, looks like 7:38. I don't think the gentleman's here, or is he?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, yes.
I'm sorry. Please come forward, sir.
So, I'm looking to get a
Oh, you may sit down.
license. Excuse me?
You can sit down if you'd like.
Okay, get rid of all. I'm looking to get a license to operate Main Street Pizza. I'm buying it from Peter. I'm not sure if you know him or not. I own my own businesses for about 11 years in Milford, and I sold it about 3 months ago. So I got enough rest. I'm still too young to retire, so buying the place, and I like the town. You know, it's a nice town, and I think I can live here
Okay.
till I retire.
Great.
So and it's Mr. Morphy's?
Morpheus, yes.
Morpheus,
Many
okay.
Morpheus.
Very good. And you've operated this type of business before in a different
yes.
town? Yeah.
Milford, Pizza 85. I don't know if you heard of it. I owned it for about 11 years.
About 11 years? Yeah. Okay, very good. I'll open this up for comments or questions from my colleagues. Do you have anything?
Nope,
Mr. Simon?
sounds great. I know Peter's looking to retire, so,
Yeah,
So,
his father is very
here as well.
ill, so
yeah,
we have to care of him.
yeah. So it'll be good to have a business maintained in that location, so I think it's fantastic to get somebody in there that's willing to continue running it as a business and keep activity going in that plaza, so that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And are you working there now?
I'm fixing it up a little bit because it needs some cleaning and stuff. Got
Okay.
a couple of more equipment that I need to put in. Yeah.
Great.
Very good. Any questions?
No,
Okay.
it's a good idea.
So we will, I will take a motion, and that would be, I would ask that the motion is contingent upon the other, building committee, board of health. So, someone like to make that motion?
Yeah, so I make a motion that we approve the victular license for Main Street Pizza and Emmanuel Morphy's.
I would second that.
Make that unanimous action?
Good luck.
Very good, sir, you're all set?
Lots.
Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
hope to see you there for lunch or dinner.
Nice to meet you.
We'll be
Okay.
there. We'll be there. Thank you.
Thank you. And I
Thank
hope
you.
I see you all.
I'll be in touch with you.
All right, thank you. Have a good day.
Good luck. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. I still don't see Mr. Rep. Meridian, so he must be stuck in traffic. All right. So moving forward onto agenda item 6.2, we're going to discuss the closure of Warren Street. This has been on the agenda for several meetings now. There was a meeting back on June 25th. We met with members of the state, trying to get an idea of what their plan was with regard to traffic, regard to possibly a rotary, and possibly changing the shape of some of the streets out there. Nothing really was finalized at that meeting, but it was a very informative meeting. So, in the short run, though, we do need to make some repairs to the parking area over on Warren Street. So, any discussion that we have not already discussed? Or any new ideas?
Yeah, I think that just a reminder for folks that what we're talking about is closing Warren Street, at a minimum temporarily while there's work done to address some of the handicap parking opportunities that exist. And so it's prudent to close the street just for that work to be done. But there's also been discussion of closing the street in the past just to alleviate some of the traffic challenges that we have in the
Right.
common area here. So I think the idea is that we'll close it for the construction with the potential of, assessing what the impact is, but then potentially keeping it closed for the long run. And we just have to see how that goes, see what the traffic impacts are, see what the community feedback is. We know the DPW director, the police and fire chief support closing it down. So I think it's worth giving it a shot and seeing how it evolves.
And that was my understanding of it also, and I would agree with that.
Right. Again, it'll give us a good chance to see if there's any adverse effects
Yeah.
to closing it.
Yeah.
And I guess quickly, a description of what work is going to be done. I know we're going to pick up some handicap parking. We're going to change the angle of parking, so I'm not sure if...
Yeah, we can speak to, yeah, we can speak to that. So,
We have drawings here if anybody wants one to look at.
so the drawing in front of you is a draft engineering plan. Kelly's been working with CME Engineering to get the final engineering plan so that we can go out to bid as soon as possible. Again, trying to beat the winter months so that will be fully functional, prior to the tough winters. So if you look at this design, what you see is that we've gone from 14 parking spaces to 21 parking spaces. And the reason why we've been able to pick up these additional parking spaces is because right now along this side of the building, we have horizontal parking next to the building. And so what we're proposing is that we have head-in parking. So that's how we're able to pick up these spaces. Additionally to doing that is we're going to move the handicap parking spaces on this side of the parking lot so that folks that need to use those spaces, they can get out of their vehicles. We're going to create a depression over by the mailbox so that folks, wheelchair users and otherwise, can use that depression, that ramp, to get onto the sidewalk. So it solves a lot of problems. Right now, folks have to park on the opposite side of the parking lot, especially in the winter. It's very challenging to navigate the walkway with snow and then try to cross this intersection to then get on the sidewalk. So
And they have to go all the way down to the corner to
That's
come
right.
back up to get to the ramp, so.
exactly. So it's a challenge in its design. And so this solves a lot of problems from expanding the number of spaces, but most importantly, it provides accessibility right at the curb on this side of the parking lot.
Okay. I think the only concern I'd have is that we kind of get some social media, some signboards in advance of actually temporarily closing the street. So I think it would be helpful if we pick a date when we actually want to close the street and give some time to at least get the word out to the public so that one day, you know, we just don't want to have a day where
Yeah.
somebody's coming down 140 and 40 miles an hour is trying to turn hard right.
Well, and I think absolutely, I think they're, like, I just don't know what the process is to close down a street, right? Like, obviously, you don't just close it, so at some point, there's gotta be signage, there's gotta be
Right.
barriers. How does that all
Well,
work?
we'll get a better sense. So right now, we have to get the final bid documents back from the engineering firm. So we would expect those in the next 2 to 3 weeks. After that, then we have to go to bid. It's a 30-day bid process. So, you know, that's gonna take us into early September. And then once we execute the contract, we're probably looking at early October before we actually go to construction. And again, that's really pushing it, because once we start to hit the winter months, we can't pour concrete. So we would certainly do all that notification and messaging to the community. I would say sometime in mid-September time period, based upon hopefully October 1st construction period.
Okay.
And then they would put signs up at each end, sort of not a through street, like that kind of thing, so up there, they put,
Right.
right, so
Right.
people have a sense that it's not a through street.
And we'll get a better sense, once we work with the engineering firm, exactly where to place those barriers. You know, at the top of the hill, probably one at the bottom of the hill over here, you know, right at the end of the parking lot. Now, looking forward, at some point, we talked to the DPW director today, if we decide to discontinue the street in perpetuity, we would have to go to town meeting and seek that authorization.
I just
Yes,
thought of
Kelly?
it, thank you, I just thought of it when Derek said September, it might be best if we plan to close it before school starts, and we can let school know the bus routes, because I do believe there's a bus that comes down this road, and they'll have to alter that. It won't change any bus stops, because there's no one that lives here, but I would almost say we should do it before the start of school, and that way people get ready when all the traffic.
Right, 'cause it'll
really
affect the
starts to-
timing potentially by a couple minutes of the routes.
Correct.
Yep.
I think that's a good time to get it done, even if we're not ready to go to construction, at least it will get everybody ready,
Yeah.
and everybody goes back to work in the fall.
Yeah. So will you notify Dr. Rustrick's office?
We will do that. Yes.
So we're thinking hypothetically, you think sometime around the first week in September?
Yeah, well, school actually starts the Wednesday before Labor Day, so I would say almost the Monday before Labor Day.
I suppose the important thing is as long as the bus gets redirected, then it's not so much about the actual date.
Right.
Right, it's just making sure that when they're planning the bus routes, they know not to plan to use that road.
Right.
And keep in mind, for 15 months when we were part of the renovation, that area of the road was closed, so it's not like the school doesn't already have a workaround. We just need to make them aware of it.
Okay. Very good. So,
Do we need a motion on
do
that?
we need a motion now, or do you want to, we'll be meeting regularly in September? Do you want to?
Yeah, I think a motion to close the street temporarily would
Take care of it now?
solidify, so then we can just continue to move forward. We'll keep you posted as progress is made anyways.
I make a motion that we close Warren Street as part of the construction and reconfiguration of the town hall parking area for an indeterminate period of time, and that we review that periodically to determine if it should be reopened, if at all.
Okay.
I'll second that.
And make that unanimous action? Very good. On to 6.3, motion to approve year-end budget transfers. So we had a few budget transfers that were left over from our last meeting.
All right, so you still have the two that were left over from the last meeting. Those are titled both transfer 1 and 2. That is to transfer in its entirety $14,000 over to the tax title foreclosure account. Additionally, at the last meeting, we did a line item transfer for fire EMS utilities, and the chief did receive one last final utility bill this past week, and so is requesting an additional $585 to satisfy that last invoice. And then we did do a transfer at the last meeting for the treasurer collector's wages for $5,000. However, that account is still short by $551. So we are requesting a transfer from the town manager expense account over to treasurer collector wages to cover those additional wage costs.
And these 4 transfers will officially close out 2019.
That's right.
Okay. Very good. Any questions from the board members?
No questions?
Okay.
It's good to get the clarification from the treasurer collector.
I need a motion.
I make a motion that we transfer $2,000 from the tax title auction account to the tax titles foreclosure account, and $12,000 from the insurance account to the tax titles foreclosure account, $585 from the fire and EMS expense account to the fire EMS department utilities account, and a transfer of $551 from town manager expense to treasurer wages.
Second.
Make that unanimous action. Okay, very good. On to 6.4, we have a motion to approve the Bonner Natural Area Conservation Restriction. Mr. Franco? Good evening. You can just speak about this just for a little bit?
Sure. I'm here. I intend to donate this parcel to the Metacomet Land Trust with a conservation restriction to be held by Sudbury Valley trustees. They're the 2 land trusts that work in town. The property is adjacent to the Whitney Conservation Area off of North Street.
I'm sorry, which conservation area?
Whitney,
Whitney.
off of North Street, Sweet William Farm. It's adjacent to Sweet William Farm in Whitney. Protecting it will protect the view that you have from North Street from Sweet William Farm. The CR is in pretty final form, I believe. I'm not sure if it's been reviewed by town council yet.
No.
But it has been reviewed by the Division of Conservation Services. There's a few things that need to get tweaked, but I suspect it's in pretty close to final form at this point.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, please. So I see the parcel map here. So we've got Sweet William Farm, which is town-owned conservation land.
Whitney Conservation Area is town-owned.
Yeah.
The Sweet William Farm, the pasture itself is privately owned, but there's a conservation restriction on it.
Okay. And so what is this doing?
This property is to the north of Sweet William Farm pasture, but towards the back.
All right. Who owns it currently?
I own it currently.
Personally, privately?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And you're donating it to
Metacomet Land Trust.
Metacomet Land Trust with the conservation
With the
restriction?
conservation restriction.
How large is the parcel?
70 acres. I'm also a board member of Metacomet. I should probably just disclose that.
That you're a what?
I'm a board member of the Metacomet
Yeah.
Land Trust. And it's part of I've owned it for about 4 years, and I purchased it with the intent of doing this. The state has something called the Conservation Tax Credit Program, where if you do a donation like this, you can get a tax credit back for a fraction of the appraised value.
Mm-hmm.
So it's taken a few years for this to work through that that program.
Mhm.
And it's to the point now where, I'm at the top of the queue.
Yeah,
Need to finish it.
got it. Do you mind showing me on this parcel map which lot it is?
So the number is 53.
I can zoom if you want me to zoom in.
It's this one.
It's this large parcel in the back.
Correct, yeah.
And where's Sweet William
Sweet
Farm?
William is right here.
Got it.
So that's Sweet William here.
Is it here?
This is a town parcel here. We call it the Thompson parcel,
Okay.
and this is.
Is that under a conservation restriction?
No, it isn't, it's just town owned.
Okay.
It's managed by the Land Stewardship Committee. and
Okay,
Conservation.
but it's landlocked.
It's landlocked.
Yeah,
and it's-
okay.
And then, this is the Whitney Conservation Area here.
Got it. And is that town or?
That is town.
That's town as well.
It has a conservation restriction on it.
Yeah,
Currently
got it.
protected,
So this is contiguous with all of that.
yes.
What a beautiful piece of land. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. That's great.
And did you
Absolutely
say
great.
that was on the north side of North Street? I don't see the identification of North Street on this map.
North
It's
Street's
on
off to
the,
the right here. So this is North Street over here,
Okay.
North Street.
So it's the
And
north
this is
side.
the north. This is the directional indicator.
Got
So North Street's here and then this is north.
it. Okay.
But it's this whole parcel.
Yeah, I see this nice
Awesome.
large
That's
swath of land.
wonderful. What a nice gift.
it's building upon something that's been going on since, since probably 95. The Warrenbrook watershed conservation land was purchased by the town. Pell Farm by Grafton. Glen Echo open space, part of that subdivision. Over the years, the two towns have been able to accumulate more than 300 acres right now, and it's growing. There's potential for it to grow into something really pretty special over the long term. It's not very easy these days to put together a contiguous parcel of open space that's maybe 500-600 acres when you're done, maybe even more than that. And this is just part of that effort.
Yeah.
Small part, but it's part of it.
Wonderful. It's great.
Right.
That's a big part.
Yeah.
70 acres is a lot of land.
And through the woods, you said now, where through the woods, this is not actually abutting the watershed, or is it?
It abuts the Whitney Conservation Area, which is town-owned, and there are trails in the Whitney property, and the intent would be that there be some connecting trails built, made onto the Bonner area.
Okay.
So there would be complete public access to
Awesome.
Any other questions?
No, I'm all set.
All right. I will take a motion.
Move to approve the Bonner Natural Area Conservation Restriction.
Second motion.
Make that unanimous action?
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Very good.
Thank you very much. Absolutely great.
Okay. Agenda item 6.5, motion to approve various DPW contracts. Derek, if you could just speak for a moment about these two contracts?
Sure, so the first contract is with Ty and Bond. Dennis Westgate, our DPW director, was present at our last meeting and talked a lot about this contract. This is for $220,000. It was approved at the fall town meeting to be expended out of the water and sewer enterprise account. And this contract with Ty and Bond is in large part to do an analysis of all of our water and sewer infrastructure. This will set a roadmap for, when we talk about capital improvement planning, this is basically the capital improvement planning process, at least the beginning portions of it, for our water and sewer enterprise here in town.
Okay. And the other one is the Beta Engineering?
Right, so the second one is for Beta Engineering for $146,500. As we all know, that the state is funding the $11 million TIP project from Hartford Ave North down to Hopkinton Road. Part of the agreement with the state was that the town would fund the design aspects of the roadway. So this represents the final design for phase 2 of the project. So right now, the We're at a 75% design, so this will take us to 100% design for phase 2.
Okay. Very good. Any questions?
No?
Nope.
I will take a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the signing of the contracts for the water wastewater comprehensive assessment and the contract for Beta to complete phase 2 of the TIP project.
I'll second.
Make that unanimous action? Okay, very good. Moving on, agenda item 6.6, motion to approve an open space committee letter of support. Mr. Taylor?
So my name's Bill Taylor, I'm from North Street. The Open Space Committee, which is a subcommittee of the Conservation Commission, is working on a project with John Robertson and his wife Cynthia and the Sudbury Valley trustees to preserve the roughly 50 acres that is the Robertson's own. The intent is that we put a conservation restriction on it, and then the Robertsons would also give us an easement to fish Warren Brook, which passes through the property, and for a trail over the property. And then there'd be a small area that would be carved out, which would permit certain agricultural uses, non-commercial, and a portion of the property that surrounds the house would be excluded from the conservation restriction as well. The conservation restriction has been appraised for $619,000. The Robertsons are offering it for $500,000. The Department of Conservation and Recreation, because the property abuts Upton State Forest and is within the ACEC, the area of critical environmental concern, they're interested in participating, so they'd contribute $125,000 towards the purchase of the conservation restriction. The town would bear the cost of the other $375 and then some transaction costs. The purpose of the letter that we have before you is we're in the process of applying for a land grant, which would cover roughly 60% of the town's contribution to the transaction. And it requires that the Board of Selectmen authorize somebody to be the point of contact for the land grant process. And we've asked Chris, who's the chair of the Conservation Commission, to do that. That letter simply authorizes the Department of Conservation Services, which is the entity that grants land grants, to work with Chris on our land grant. And then the rest of it, about $165,000, is we're working with the CPC on that.
Now, I know this article came up before. I shouldn't say this article. This topic of discussion came up once before, and the funding on the state side fell far short. And at the time, I was on the board at the time, we voted not to move forward because it looked like it was too great an amount of money for the town to put forward towards more open space. What does it look like now? You think that the mathematics are going to be, this is going to actually lead to a warrant article for, did you say 165,000?
Yes, it will lead to a warrant article that for $167,000 from the CPA, or the Community Preservation Fund. And I forget the number, but there's a fair amount in the open space balance.
The open space account in CP, I think it's more than 400,000 right now.
Mm-hmm. So this has no impact on taxes or tax rate?
No. No, and so between DCR and the land grant, it's 125 and 250, so about $375,000 of the purchase price is coming from the state.
That's great.
And then another 120,000 or so roughly is a bargain sale that the owner is forgoing.
Yeah, so the Robertsons have long had it in mind to preserve this piece of property. It's really a goal of theirs. So this, the way it works out, it permits them to pass along some of the value of the property to their children while realizing their dream of preserving it. So, and of course, the Robertsons have owned the property, the bulk of it, since 1964. And for whatever reason, they never put it into any one of the current use programs, Chapter 61. So they have essentially paid the full tax amount for the total time they've owned it, notwithstanding the fact they did have the option of taking advantage of the Chapter 61 program, which would have been entirely appropriate because their goal all along was to preserve it. So
Tens of thousands of dollars
easily.
given to the town.
Yeah.
And now the land itself.
Yes.
What are the taxes on it, Bill?
Well, they're not insignificant. I have an analysis somewhere, but I think it was probably between $5,000 and $8,000 a year now.
Yeah.
Of course, that changes every year.
I mean, the only thing that, folks in attendance may or may not know, and folks at home, is when we either buy open space like this or we take a conservation restriction, we no longer collect property tax money on that land.
Well, actually, in this case here, because it'll be privately held with a conservation restriction, there will still be property taxes collected on the property. The land will not be valued at our full value. It will actually probably have a value very close to what it would have been if they had put it into Chapter 61, because they're essentially using it the same way. And when they sell it, that next owner will also have to pay property tax on it as well. It's really, when you're trying to preserve land and you're thinking about property taxes, it's one of the best outcomes that you can have. So it achieves a couple of goals. There is some tax revenue still associated with the property, but you do have the opportunity to preserve it. Arguably, you've avoided building, in this case, 7 houses, I think it was. And there are costs, of course, of servicing those homes. So I think it's close to a wash. But there's a lot of work that would need to be done to completely validate that statement. I recognize that.
And the conservation, I'm sorry.
Fully supports this project.
And the restriction remains on it forever, right?
Yep, unless something happens, years and years from now.
The restriction would be monitored jointly by the Conservation Commission and the DCR.
DCR.
So, and monitoring generally entails every year somebody walks the property to make sure that the restrictions are being complied with.
And any expenditure of town CPC funding has to go through town hall and town meeting,
Yes.
right, regardless, so.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of approvals that need to take place before we get to the end here. The town, DCR is probably just getting the budget for their land acquisition, and so the amount, and then the commitment to this project needs to be approved, and the land grant needs to be approved.
And the way this conservation restriction is held is a little different than the Bonner in respect to the property tax issue?
Well, in the case of the Bonner property, I believe it's been donated.
It is different in that, at the end of the day, the Bonner property will belong to a nonprofit. So there won't be, the nonprofit won't need to pay taxes on the property. Here, at the end of the day, it'll be in private ownership. So like Bill stated, there will be some tax liability for the owner, the Robertsons, or future owners.
Any other questions?
No questions here.
I mean, my only caution, I understand, what you're trying to achieve here, but my only caution is in the past, the state did not come up or did not fulfill their part of the bargain as far as mathematics. And it was coming before the board with a much higher cost, acquisition cost. So, that's the only thing that, supporting it at one value is one thing, but if this warrant article is $100,000 higher,
Well, the project as it's been presented to you and to the Community Preservation Committee is that, in effect, if we don't get the money from DCR, then either the project does not go forward, or it can go forward, if we can find the $125,000 from another source. So we could go out and fundraise for that. But the ask at this point to the Community Preservation Committee is capped at the $167,000. Which is, just by way of just a little bit of background, we did exactly the same thing with the Sweet William Farm. It was contingent, the CPC funding was contingent upon getting the land grant. And if we had failed to get the land grant, in that case, we only would have been able to go forward if we were able to raise the $500,000 we did get in grant money from other sources.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
No.
Nope.
Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the Open Space Committee letter of support.
I second the motion.
Make that unanimous action?
And final thing is I need to get a signed copy of it either today or tomorrow. 'Cause
It's signed by the chairman.
Yeah.
In,
The application is due Thursday at 3 PM in Boston, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
Bill.
Oh, look at that.
There you go.
Oh, boy.
Oh.
I'm getting nervous.
It was unanimous, Steve.
I have to stick around for a few minutes.
Here's a pen.
Okay, moving on to agenda item 6.7. Motion to approve the Board of Assessors supplemental billing. This is regard to Mass General Law 59, Section 2D, which would allow the town to assess a home at a time of occupancy, which we talked about this a little bit a few meetings ago. Kelly or Bill, if you want to.
You did most of the research, I'll let you
Yeah,
take this one.
so I investigated how much additional revenue the town would have, property tax revenues the town would have realized if we had done this in 2017 and 2018. And for those 2 years, it was $132,000, so about $66,000 a year. I think it was roughly 25 homes in each year, 26, 20, whatever, which would require somebody to go out and visit the home and do all the data collection, and then we would send, that information gets sent to our valuation firm, they do the data input, and then the system calculates the value for the home. We have reached out through Tracy, the department administrator, to the company that does all of our revaluation work, and they have indicated that they would be able to do up to 35 visits a year for $1,000, which is well less than what we would earn. So it seems like a very straightforward, decision in that we're going to end up recognizing additional revenue for a fairly small investment. I did check with the collector to confirm that they were, prepared to do the collection side of things, and he did indicate that they were.
So to further, we did have our assessors meeting last week, and we did vote to support and make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen to change the rescission to accept this statute so we can move forward. And we'll be planning on working the next couple months to implement the procedures on that. However, we just do ask the Board of Selectmen to support any additional expenses that we will be finding in the next fiscal year to implement this, and we should know by the time we do the budget for FY21 what the total amount of expenses that we have. But we don't expect it to be a huge amount. However, there will be some expenses, and there might be some additional personnel additions to the staff in order to accommodate this. But for 60.
Why is that?
Just because the data collection is done by the vendor, but the billing and the extra work that's required, I'm not saying it is, but we don't have the exact policy here, so I do know that the motion was, we support this, and it's a great idea, and we'll bring in the new revenue, but if there's a caveat that we need additional hours to accommodate it, we would just ask the Board of Selectmen to support that.
It would just be nice to know for certain.
I'm not gonna support some abstract, vague concept of what an additional requirement might be in terms of staffing or hour. I don't have no idea what that means, but when there is something concrete, I absolutely will look at it.
Sure.
There's no question about that.
I just want it to you, maybe the caveat is I want you to be aware that we do expect additional expenses, but until we fully implement this procedure, we won't know what that is, and we're prepared to request additional funding if needed.
I think it'd be nice to at least have something maybe on paper to just be able to say, okay, it's, like you say, if it's gonna be $1,000 more for, say, data collection, if that contract's gonna increase, what else is gonna increase? Because we don't wanna get into a situation where we're pulling an additional 66,000 on average per year, but expenses go up, 40,000.
It won't go up that.
If
No.
we're only talking a few $1,000s, it's
Exactly.
obviously no-brainer.
Exactly.
If that's the situation.
And Selectman Brunel might be able to add more to the process since she was involved in it in Hopkinton.
Right, and we didn't find that it was that much additional expense. We didn't have to increase anybody's hours. It's treated like you would an omitted assessment, only you could just call it a supplemental billing, just like the real estate, for the real estate and the CPA. Could I ask you, Bill, how many building permits are out right now?
I couldn't answer it. So there were, yeah, I know that, so like I said, I think there was roughly 25 issued, occupancies issued, certificates issued in each of the 2 years. And I would, it varies from year to year, of course, the number. And I did look at 2019, and I think the number was 21.
21?
So my guess is we're probably talking, well, it's hard to tell because we have the 139 unit thing going on, the townhome development going on at the top of Hartford Ave, so.
Upton Ridge.
Yeah. So, that's a dramatic number.
Have they pulled any permits on? They must.
yes.
Yeah.
I think
yes.
somebody was telling me they've got 30 deposits already.
But there's no occupancy permits yet, or there are?
No,
No.
No occupancy.
no, but they are building and they are selling them. And if anything, aren't they even starting phase 2 to a certain degree? Yeah. There's been some discussion, because they've already started phase 2, like when it comes to road work and infrastructure. And some of the neighbors from Shining Rock are not happy with that because they thought phase 1 would need to be completed before phase 2 was, and they're just moving forward.
So we could have considerable revenue if they all
Yeah,
come.
by implementing this year with those coming in, since we didn't catch them on June 30th, within the next couple of months, if they get occupancy, we get a couple months of additional revenue.
And in order to implement this, there's a form that going to have to be submitted to the Department of Revenue.
By myself.
Which notifies them that we're rescinding our notice of rejection. The way this works is it's required to be implemented unless you notify the Department of Revenue that you're rejecting it. So we did at some point reject it. So now we have to tell them that we're rescinding our rejection. It's a very short form, and
And I fill it out
and once
as the
it's
town clerk.
once it's submitted, then we're good to go. And
Any extra hours would probably be in the treasurer collector's office? Would that make sense, or where would those extra hours?
No, the bulk, the way I view it, the bulk of the work is done by the assessors. I mean, really, the hardest part of this is going out, when you otherwise wouldn't have been going out to do a data collection.
We were only talking, like, if they do 10 occupancy permits, that's a 10 bill commitment, which takes 15 minutes.
Again, I didn't mean to make it sound like it was gonna be a lot in expenses. I just wanted you to be aware that it's not coming at no cost. That it could, the
No.
most it could be The least it could be is $1,000, the most it could be is a couple extra hours for staff personnel, plus the $1,000.
And that would be, then you're saying you think that'd be in the assessor's office?
Correct,
Yeah, you only have one person in the office.
correct.
Any other questions or comments? Then I will take a motion.
I will move to accept Chapter 59, Section 2D, and to reverse the rescission that was taken by a previous Board of Selectmen.
A second?
Make that unanimous action?
Okay.
Thank you.
Just one other quick item. I think you mentioned at the last meeting, how many communities currently have that plan and how many do not?
Well, I checked the Department of Revenue database, which collects the actions that communities have taken, and my recollection is there was 10 that had notified that they were rejected. Interestingly, however, when Derek reached out to Plymouth, he found that they are not using it. But I don't remember seeing Plymouth in that list. So my whole point of that is, I think it's most communities do it. It makes perfect sense that they would, and that seems to be borne out by the data that the Department of Revenue has collected, but I have a lot of doubt that it's fully accurate, that's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah. Yeah. No, I made the motion.
I know you did.
On to agenda item 7.0, recognition. I don't have anything. Either of my colleagues, anybody have anything? No. Okay.
Nope.
On to 8.0, town manager's report.
So I'll start off talking just a little bit about the DPW. 2 weeks ago, they issued their CCR, which is otherwise known as Community Consumer Confidence Report. And so it's basically their water quality report. Every public drinking water supplier in the state is mandated to develop a report such as this and then send that report to each of their customers. And so we printed 500 of these, and these are now also found on the town's website as well. This report really just highlights the drinking water quality in town, so it talks about chlorine, talks about lead, things of that nature. So again, it's more work of the DPW, but again, it's something that it's another unfunded mandate we're required to do. Last week I attended the Architectural Access Board. They held a hearing. As we all know, the AAB had issued an order last summer, May of last year, and they required the town to complete the upper ramp at the upper parking lot. They then required the town to provide accessibility to the boat dock, the fire pit, and the Ramsey building. And so at that hearing, they wanted to hear about the status of the progress of the town. So we were able to let them know that we are finally fully compliant with the upper walkway at the upper ramp. That I reported at the last meeting that's been signed off by the building commissioner and our engineers. So that walkway is being used now. Right now, the parking lot is closed because there's no activity, but again, it's fully compliant. It's been signed off by multiple sources. In addition to that conversation, we talked about the state's requirement to submit this recreation master plan, which was submitted to the state. But again, it still found us out of compliance, so we still had to let the state know what our plans were to provide accessibility to those areas. So right now, working with the recreation director, they've decided to pull the boat dock out of the water. There's really no way to make that accessible at this time. And then we have already have a contract with CME. They're designing a walkway that'll go to the pavilion, the fire pit, and the Ramsey building. And we're gonna work with the Recreation Commission, hopefully on August 20th, they'll present their master plan, and you'll see in their master plan that their design is to remove the Ramsey building and replace that space with a playground. This walkway that's being designed today will be designed in such a way that the playground, that we can use that walkway to provide accessibility to the playground. So the state agreed to what our plans were to move forward. They gave us an extension to June 30th of 2020 to complete that walkway. I let them know that we designing it, we gotta go out to bid, and then we have to seek approval at town meeting for the funding for this walkway. So given that, and then obviously we need the construction period would commence in the spring, they gave us till June 30th to complete that walkway. And they just require that I report to them on a monthly basis as to the progress that we're making. So overall, I think it was a good hearing. We're all on the same page moving forward. We're just gonna keep them abreast. And then a couple weeks ago, Kelly and I, we attended a mass development meeting. I mentioned it for district incentive financing. And so this is something I think we need to keep on our front burner as far as one of the tools in our toolkit when we think about the redevelopment of the town center project. So the district financing program basically allows towns to identify an area for economic development and then take the new growth within that area and apply it for public purpose. So typically it's used for infrastructure. So when we talk about rerouting Grove Street as it exists today through potentially the 6th Main Street corridor, the DPW, they've done an analysis and they think in order to move the infrastructure, rebuild the bridge and then the road work, it's approximately $4.6 million. And so the DIF, the District Incentive Financing Program, is a potential way to fund that. So you say $4.6 million, what's the debt payment on that a year? And with the new growth in this town center project, can that pay for the infrastructure? So it's something that we're looking at. We're working with Mass Development. I talked to the state today a little bit more in depth of how can we try to connect all these dots. And so the DIF program and the Masterworks program are now two programs that we can potentially use to make that happen. The last opportunity, which I think is, and I wish Rep. Meridian was here to talk a little bit about it, but last week we submitted $4.6 million under the transportation bond bill. Again, looking at 3 different avenues of sources of funding in order to make part of the town center vision reality. So that'll be submitted by both Senator Moore and Rep. Meridian. I'm sure it'll be approved. At least the language will be approved. We're not so certain that the dollars will be approved. We've been approved in the past for bond money, and we haven't received the money to this date. So, as Rep. Meridian will call it, he calls it funny money. That gets approval, but typically it's hard to come by. And so the last item I just want to talk about, Selectman Matalian, you asked a question, I think, in one of our previous meetings, given our soaring utility costs, where do we stand with Nexamp and that solar array field? We purchased energy credits when that was supposed to come online, and that was going to potentially relieve the town of upwards of $30,000 in electricity costs. So I mentioned that I had been talking to them in previous months, and I went back to previous emails. I just wanted to let you know that back in January, I was communicating with them, and they said that they don't anticipate that coming online until the fall of 2019. So we're a few months away. We'll see what happens this fall. Hopefully it comes online. They're waiting for the DPU to approve that connection, and then once that happens, then they can light up that solar field. So hopefully we'll see some relief this fall. If not, we'll keep pressing the DPU. Maybe we'll have to get our local delegation involved in that.
Okay. Very good.
That's it.
Very good. Any questions?
No?
Okay, very good. Thank you, Derek.
Great, thank you.
All right. On to agenda item 9, new business. Does anybody have anything under new business?
I do not.
I do not.
Okay. The only thing, I guess we can look ahead topics, and I think we have a discussion of when we'd like to, I think we were in agreement that we would like to have some sort of either a meeting or a workshop with the EDC and the RFP. So, do you want to do that in advance of our next VOS meeting? Or do you want to do that, schedule that for August 20th?
The update for the economic development? Maybe have a working session or something?
That's what I was thinking, and now we'll have the new committee has been formed, so I'm not sure if they'll have a meeting before we have a chance to have this working session. Of course, they'll need to meet, they'll need to organize their board, so I'm not sure if we have a timetable on that. But I would ask you to keep your schedules open. And if it turns out that August 20th is a heavy agenda item, it may be better to do that in advance.
Okay.
And we can meet with those other two boards and try to get some dialogue going and what our expectations are.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should do it as soon as possible, frankly, to meet with them. I think we need to give the RFP committee at least a little bit of time to organize and have a meeting or two just to get themselves oriented, and then have them meet with us and with the EDC. I think that would be the
Yeah.
best course of action, and I think if we can do it before August 20th, that's great.
I think that's what I would like to do. I just feel like it's a long time. We're talking, 5 weeks away. So they should have time to have a meeting, organize their board, and then we should be able to meet with, those other two boards. So maybe we can talk about that. We can discuss that through email with town manager and see if,
I'm looking at the calendar right now. What I would propose is that I can send out a poll to the committee members for potentially the week of the 29th, July 29th, and see if we can organize a meeting so that they can get themselves together, have discussion, and then you can pick a time before the 20th, so they'll already have their first meeting, and then if you pick a time prior to the 20th, I can let them know that there's gonna be a joint meeting held on such and such date.
right.
Kelly, I have a question. Do you notify them that they all have to be sworn in before they,
Sandy actually does that,
Oh.
she
Right.
notifies them of the.
I'll do that, and I'll set up the distribution list,
Yeah.
email, I'll call it RFP something or whatever, but I'll let you know, and I'll do that tomorrow.
thank you.
And then usually if it's a new committee like that, I actually try to attend the first meeting so I can
Right.
do it all at
Swear 'em
once.
all in.
Right. And there's a week, I believe, in August that you will not be around? Is that the 8th or the
12th, yes.
So then tentatively, we could just kind of think about the first week in August or sometime before the 12th. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. So that takes care of new business and look-ahead topic. Look-ahead topic, we also have we have the recreation master plan presentation. I think that's on schedule for August 20th?
Tentatively, it's still on schedule.
Okay. All right. And update from the EDC, we'll cover that in advance of our next meeting.
And what about discussing the financial reserve policy?
I actually asked that be pulled. So somehow that arrived, that it's still just been hanging around, and it's just been hanging around on our agenda, so.
Could I ask you why?
Yes, you may. In previous meetings, we've already talked about this, but we have right now, there's different ideas floating around. For instance, I think it's DLS has said that in some communities, they recommended 5% financial reserve policy. We're already in advance of 5%. We have much more than that in financial reserve. Then all of a sudden, you read somewhere else where they're predicting they're looking for 10%. Meanwhile, the state is sitting at 1.2%. So I think it's hypocritical to say to the town of Upton that we should hold 10% of the people's tax dollars, which is basically, in my opinion, taxation without representation. So I don't think that it's a valid policy. And it would require you every year to match whatever, if you think about it, each year, if your taxation goes up by $800,000, that means that you're gonna adopt a policy that says we're gonna tax an additional 10% of that and put it in reserve. I don't like it at all.
you don't tax anymore, you take 10% of the 800,000.
And I would.
It grows with your budget, so
Just-
realistically, it, you know, again,
This is an important conversation to have. I think the conversation that we're talking about now is whether or not this should be something that's put on the agenda for the Board of Selectmen to discuss it.
I think
Discussing it is different than adopting it. Clearly, you don't want to adopt it, but I think we should discuss it.
if we're gonna discuss it and, you know, we're halfway through it.
We don't have to discuss it now, but we should put it on the agenda to discuss publicly what our opinions are about a financial reserve policy.
I mean, ultimately, we're talking about, you know, how much money should be held in, you gotta also look at the various dollars that are taxpayers' dollars that are held in different accounts.
I think we should put it on an agenda to discuss it.
All right? That's fine.
I agree with that, yes, second.
Is that a motion?
And I think it's also important to try to
Right.
identify
Right.
all the different dollars in all the different accounts, such as CPC.
I agree with you.
You know, that's still taxpayer dollars.
That's absolutely correct.
You know, same as school E&D, taxpayers dollars.
Can't wait to discuss it.
You know, there's a lot to it. I like to minimize it, so if you folks would like,
Steve,
we could cut the numbers.
You seconded, excuse me, I'm sorry. Are you
I
gonna?
second.
Oh, there's nothing, I don't think there's anything
No,
to.
it's the
to
chairman,
say.
it's the chairman's agenda, so he can put it on the agenda or not.
Oh.
Yeah, we
I
can-
thought I heard a motion, I'm sorry.
No,
That's
no,
not
there
just
was,
Yes,
I don't
clarifying.
think there was a motion.
But Maureen and I clearly support putting it on the agenda, so at your discretion, we would like it put on the agenda.
All right, we'll wait
To
till we
discuss it.
have, wait till we have an easy agenda schedule and we'll put it on there.
Great.
All right. Are you commenting on this particular item, or you want to comment on the public comment?
Well, you can call it whatever you want. If you read the last sentence of the financial policy that the Finance Committee approved months ago, it says that it's not a hard, fast decision, that it is flexible depending upon the situation that you find yourself in. It is not hard and fast, period.
Now, may I rebut that? Personally, that should be at the discretion of the Board of Selectmen. It's the Board of Selectmen that are setting policy for the town of Upland. FinCom can discuss it or make whatever recommendation FinCom wants to make, but ultimately, it's the Board of Selectmen that are supposed to be taking the lead and supposed to be setting these policies in motion. We can't hide behind policies that are made by subordinate boards. Or so, I shouldn't say subordinate, I should say, yeah, I guess subordinates. A good enough word.
I take exception to your referring to the Finance Committee or any other town committee as a subordinate to the Board of Selectmen. And so,
Don't forget, it's an appointed committee versus an elected board. There is a big difference there, Mr. Flaherty. Don't forget that. Anyways, under public comment. Does anybody have anything under public comment? All right. I think that's it. I will take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second?
Unanimous action.